don't know about you, but I have subscribed to the History Channel. I have a fascination with history, and I think the further you go back in history, the more fascinating it gets. Maybe simply for the reason that we don't know so much. But it also gets fairly muddy, doesn't it? It sort of gets a little ambiguous. And I'm rather dubious myself about ancient history, because I think a lot of the documents that come from back in that time were written fairly biasly for particular religious or economic reasons, whatever, and they were usually written by the conquerors, weren't they, rather than those who lost out, and they like to portray themselves as heroes and so forth, and I just think it all gets a little wishy-washy there. Is there any other way that we can find out something about ancient history? Well, of course, there's archaeology. Archaeology is great for telling us what people had, but in terms of how they used them and what they believed and so forth, well, I think it's a little wishy-washy as well. Archaeologists tend to dig up a clay pot, and then from that they go on about the moon and how they worship the moon, and every Tuesday they went down to the creek and they washed themselves in the pot and all this. And I start to think, well, how do you know that? You know, you only dug it up out of the soil. And they lose me, you know. So I just think, well, blimey, is there another way that we can look back into ancient history? And there is, of course. In the early 19th century, philologists, which is scientists who are interested in the study of words, started to notice similarity between certain words in the ancient Indian language of Sanskrit and European words. And eventually they came to the conclusion that, in actual fact, there had to have been a singular central language that these people spoke for there to become so many words that were so similar. It was too much of a coincidence, and they formulated the whole ideology of an Indo European language, a proto-Indo European language that preceded the written word. So this is a language that they've developed that has never been written down. Apparently, these people split off into the various groups before it came to be written down. However, through piecing together these similarities, they have been able to establish this entire language and put together not just words that these people, these common people, our ancestors, if you are a European, or from the north of India, or one of the Indo-European language groups, they've been able to piece together not just the particular words that these people spoke, but the entire language, the whole structure of the language, the form of the language, the grammar, and everything. And even how it sounded. So you can get now a dictionary of a language that was never written down and that has only been worked out. And so I have one. It's called the Dictionary of the Indo-European People. Indo-European Roots. And it's quite interesting to look back and see how these people lived, how they thought, and from even the similarities in words, where perhaps they lived at a time when they were together before they split off into the various groups. And it divided into various subgroups of the language. So there was Indo-Iranian, Greek, Armenian, Balto-Slavic, Albanian, Celtic, Italic, and Germanic. And there's also, of course, two extinct Hittite and other Anatolian languages. Now, English, therefore, derives from the Germanic languages. And, so from this we can find words that tell us a lot about how these people lived and where they lived. So, for example, we've got snow. There is a word similar to snow in English, in almost all of those particular languages. They lived in an area with forests, they had swamp, they had boggy terrain. Now there's an absence of a general word for the sea, which suggests that they lived in the inland area, right? However, they did have a word for bog and swamp, so therefore, and also lake, and they also had transport to cross across the lake. There were beech trees, bears, mice, fish, hares, cranes and eagles, amongst other things. Where did they live? Well, that's very difficult to work out, and no one has actually precisely worked out. However, if you sort of look at all those general things, a general area of perhaps Yugoslavia into perhaps the Caucasus Mountains, and that sort of Central European area might be suggested. But anyway, it's a massive subject, and I've only just touched on it this week. Perhaps in another week I can go back into it again. But there you go. There's a way that we can look back into history and see how our ancient ancestors lived, how they even thought, and their whole ideology, through the mere use of words. And these particular words have been handed down from generation to generation for thousands of years, and I'm talking back around like 6,000 years or so, to this day. And so we're still using them, and I think that's rather fascinating. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching. Please rate my video, subscribe if you haven't already, and rate it. Good on you. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.